might think drawing anything in perspective requires mastering dozens of complicated rules. But honestly, you can get surprisingly far by mastering just two basic shapes, the cube and the cylinder. In this video, we're going to look at how professional artists use these simple forms to construct dynamic shots. And I'll also show you some practice exercises that help me get more comfortable with perspective along the way. So let's start with the most important one, constructing dynamic shots like these. Like a pro, you only need to master these two ingredients. It is essential to learn how to draw these shapes in perspective first, meaning learning to draw cubes and cylinders will force you to draw in all types of perspective. When I say all types, I mean all of them. The cube. This is pretty self-explanatory. If you're a beginner, this thing's going to be a best friend for a while. So get used to drawing it. Most of the shape in a dynamic art is mostly formed from cube and cuboid. To draw anything in 3D effectively, the most important part of drawing these shapes is the axis. As you can see, there are three axes, X, Y, and Z. Focus on putting all three when drawing them. It will help you determine the sides of these shapes. Putting these axes is the most important part to drawing anything because everything has three axes, which is perfectly represented by the cube. Once you get used to drawing random floating cubes, we can move on and make things a little harder. Oh, by the way, the thing no one talks about is making two of the three axes run parallel to each other. Now, technically, there's nothing wrong with drawing a cube this way. It's still a valid construction, and you can see both the front and top planes. The problem is that because those two axes are parallel, the side of the cube almost disappears. That makes the whole shape feel flat and a little unnatural. Foreshortening. Now, let's talk about foreshortening. One easy way to understand it is to imagine you're looking through a camera. The closer an object gets to the camera, the more dramatic the perspective becomes. If the object is farther away, it appears flatter and the foreshortening is much weaker. For example, imagine this cube sitting some distance away. Since it's farther from the camera, I'll keep the perspective relatively subtle. But as I move the cube closer, the depth becomes much more obvious, making the shape feel larger, more three-dimensional, and more dynamic. And if I push it really close to the camera, the perspective can become extremely exaggerated, almost like a fisheye lens. This becomes even more important when you have multiple objects in the same scene. So when you're drawing, try to imagine that you're actually placing a camera somewhere in the scene. Then think about where each object sits in relation to that camera. The closer it is, the stronger and more exaggerated the perspective should feel. That simple way of thinking can make foreshortening much easier to understand, where you can comfortably drawing cubes from at any angle. Now let's move on to the other basic form I mentioned earlier, cylinders. If you look at almost any drawing, you'll notice how often cylinders appear. In fact, cubes and cylinders alone are enough to build a surprisingly large number of simple scenes in perspective. Take this drawing as an example. At first, all those small details in the background can make it look complicated, but if you simplify everything, most of the forms can be reduced to basic cubes and cylinders. And this is especially useful when drawing people. Once you understand cylinders, the human figure starts to feel much less intimidating because cylindrical forms are everywhere in the body. Before jumping into anatomy, I like using a shape that's halfway between a cube and a cylinder. The rounded corners force you to start thinking about how curves behave in perspective without making the exercise too difficult. After that, practice cylinders from different rotations and angles. The main thing to watch is how the two circular ends relate to each other. Once you understand their angle and spacing, you can simply connect the sides with straight lines to create the form. Now that we understand cubes and cylinders, we can start using those forms to build something much more important, the human figure. Since characters are usually the main focus of a drawing, I want to spend more time practicing how the body works in 3D space. I start by rotating a simplified torso and a loomis head through different angles. The goal isn't to make them look pretty yet, it's to train myself to actually understand their three-dimensional structure. And this is where things get noticeably harder. We're no longer dealing with simple cubes, so now proportion, symmetry, and anatomical landmarks become much more important. Take this torso, for example. You can basically think of it as a rounded, tapered box with a cylinder attached underneath. The tricky part is understanding how that taper changes as I rotate the form, while still keeping the structure consistent from one angle to another. For the Loomis head, I find it easier to begin with a simple sphere and then build the rest of the head around it using the usual construction lines. Normally, you'd carefully measure the proportions, but for these exercises, I'm mostly focusing on getting the overall 3D structure right. You can do the same thing with individual body parts too. Practice rotating arms, legs, hands, or anything else that gives you trouble. The more forms you rotate, the easier it becomes to visualize them in space. And yeah, I'm not gonna lie, this exercise was pretty difficult. So if you find yourself struggling at any point, don't feel like you have to keep pushing forward. Go back to the previous exercises and use them as warm-ups. If you can't comfortably rotate simple forms yet, more complicated ones are only going to become frustrating. And finally, we reach curvilinear or fisheye perspective. Technically, you could go deep into all the extra vanishing points and complicated construction behind it. But there's one idea that I found much more useful. The closer an object gets to the edges of the fisheye grid, the stronger the distortion becomes. So instead of trying to memorize every rule, focus on how much the objects are being affected by their position within the frame. And if you add a strongly foreshortened object into that scene, the exaggerated perspective becomes even more obvious. For this final piece, I tried combining everything from the previous levels: basic forms, rotation, foreshortening, and curvilinear perspective. I'll be honest, I'm definitely not completely comfortable at this level yet, so getting everything to look convincing took quite a bit of trial and error. But that's actually the whole point of these exercises. Every time you rotate an object, its relationship with the grid and vanishing point changes. The goal isn't just to draw one object correctly, it's to eventually become comfortable moving forms around inside the same 3D space. Even practicing something as small as rotating a single body part can make a huge difference in how natural the final drawing feels. And the more I practice perspective, the more I realize that you don't necessarily need everything to be mathematically perfect. Once the perspective is convincing enough, let's say around 80% accurate, you can start allowing a little imperfection. Sometimes those small imperfections are actually what make